All right. So we left off the last time with basically defining the API routes, and now the big question is, okay, so there are two things unaddressed. One is authentication, and the other one is working with a database. So I have created a very simple database here. It takes an ID that's a binary 16. It takes a UUID, and I'm actually going to create, instead of the post user, let's do that first. So let's quickly do that and say, okay, so there is going to be a username. It's going to be neon. There's going to be an email address. It's going to be some at example.com. It's going to be a password, and okay, it's going to be 1 2 3 4 5 6, and that's what we need for now, I assume. Okay, so let's look at the database setup again. So we have two tables, one user email and one user field. So we have to basically get those into two different databases, right? Two different tables. So instead of this fake stuff here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a user. And we're going to introduce the DB app function here. So what we want to do in that case is we want to create an instance for handling the IDs. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write an insert. That's going to be an ask. So the ask is pretty simple. It's the first parameter is either a table, in that case it is, and the second parameter is always basically the parameters itself. So we want to, in this case, have, let's make this nice and clean. In this case, we want to have a username, and that's going to be the param username. Yeah, I cannot write. And it's also going to be the password. Okay. Now, a couple of extra things we want to address here. So first of all, so since we're dealing with unique IDs, I don't have an auto increment. So let's also use the ID and set an ID. Okay, so that'll take care of that, at least almost. So what we always want to do here in that case is, and this is maybe a little bit confusing as of now, so I'm going to convert this from hex to binary. I'm going to use the $sign as an identifier for that. So there are a couple of those. We call those separandi and selectandi. And in that case, it would be an operandi, and we will get into that later. For now, what is happening here? So I am inserting into user an ID, a username, and a password. Fair enough. And what I also want to do, though, is repeat that step and say, well, let's talk about the user email. Yep. And I'm pretty sure I really can't write. Okay, so that kind of crashed my system here. Hello. Yeah, this screen recorder I'm using, that's quite a heavy one. Wow. Wow. Okay. I have no idea if you guys been with me for this, but that was an experience. And so in here I have also an ID. And actually, in that case, I want to do that last. So I'm going to have the user ID. That's how I'm going to bind it. And I'm going to use the old ID for that. Right? So that's exactly the same ID. And then I'm going to have the email in that case, which will be param's email. And so what I also want to do here is I want to insert an ID, and this should actually be a new ID. So I'm going to do it like this. And I think this only generates, so we probably also want to say, yeah, I thought so. Okay, so that should take care of this. So let's just assume that I'm super sure about what's happening here. So those are the things I'm going to fill in. And now let's see if we send the post with username, email, and password, what's going to happen. And go. Actually, the response is still exactly what we said. We didn't really give any kind of different response here, but that's fine. Let's basically go to get user and do something else here. And now just say like, okay, here I'm going to do something even easier. Just give me all users. Oh, come on. And I also want to convert the user ID back because the API cannot handle binary data, of course. I'm going to call that result, and I'm going to return the result. So now let's say get and fire this thing. Okay, so what do we see here? Okay, this is now from the user table only. We've got an ID, we've got a username and password and an insert date that's automatically filled in, and that's all fine and dandy, but I'm really missing something interesting here. So what about the other table? Okay, so let's just say user email dot email. So we got that information as well. And that's empty. But that is not good. So let's see if our and can I somehow read this? Yeah. So I want to actually explore this a little bit. Okay. Wow. Okay, so here I have, oh, it's of course in binary, so that's a little bit of an issue. You know what? Let me fake this a little bit here and just say we're gonna check this out in a different way. Oops, what was that one? We're actually gonna say, yeah, we're gonna make two of those. I'm gonna make two of those, and then simply say, give me only the user ID. Yeah, let's do only this. And in the second one, give me only the user email. Right. And here we're going to do something like this. Result 2. So let's see what happens. Yeah, that's so not what I wanted to check. So what I also want to check naturally is if those match. So user email, user ID. Yep. And they do not match. Okay, so we did make a mistake while inserting here. Interesting. Oh. And I already see the issue. Okay, That's not good. Okay, let's clear the database quickly. And I'm fully aware that you would probably do stuff like this differently, but it fulfills a certain question here. We don't need to go into PHP mapping or something like that. So delete from user and delete from user email. Okay, and this will probably tell me that I'm sending params. Yeah, it's doing this because that's faster. Okay, so let's delete quickly. Whoops. Oh. Okay. Got it. So let's go back to get. All right, so this is empty. That's perfect. So now we're going to post again. All right, and then we're going to get. Yeah, and now they match. Perfect. Okay, so sorry about this confusion here. We're basically going to say return result. And so here we want to have probably a little bit more from user. And then also we want to have the user email. Okay, now let's see. Perfect. So yeah, that was a little bit of a detour, but what actually happened here? So what happened here was we created a join on the fly. So how can I show this to you? Actually, the easiest thing is to say, let's not execute the query. This will be a problem for the JSON, so I'm going to basically just bar dump that for you. All right, so as you can see, what was created is a, let me actually maximize this a little bit, was this string here. Okay, select everything from user, and then the user ID, user email as email from user, and then join on user email. And so this expects there to be a user ID because that's the first table we chose, or the previous one, and it puts it back to email. There are no exclusions here. This is something to do with prepared statements. So let's just say we also want to say, well, where username, not just any stuff, right? Is, and we're going to say param. So what we've sent here. Okay, so this executed. We'll basically say, okay, so there's a string of neon that we want to apply, and you can actually see here it creates a where username equals. So that's a prepared statement that's fired right away. So if I go away from the debug and that one as well, then we should get a nicer result as JSON, and you can see this is exactly what we want. There's a lot to say about the DB functionality. So let's start with something a little bit easy. So as you can see, this is the DB itself is takes a string as a first parameter, and this is basically I define my selects. And you've already seen that, okay, there this operandies and so on. So here apparently I'm doing this. I mean, I can also say like user insert date as inserted, So what will this do? So what you see right now is this is nice for human, but not so nice for JavaScript. So if we give it and insert it here, then we get a nice microsecond timestamp that we can work with if we have, like any kind of client-side things, which is normally useful. So again, here's the selector string, and then this is the condition area. So after that, we can, in theory, create something else that would basically create call functions. Let's just say we want to have a limit, and I understand how pointless it is, and it starts with 1, 0, and 1, right? So let's go back to the debug so you see what's happening under the hood. And then result. I have to just do something against the terrible eye cancer. Okay, and then here you basically see what's happening here is it transforms it, here to timestamp, and then here it creates the limit. So that's the kind of stuff you probably are doing on a regular basis, because writing selects is probably the most common form of using it, but I mean there's so much more. So what happens, for example, if I directly put in the params, right? So if I execute this, then you might think that there's some kind of security issues, and that's not completely wrong. So this would fail. No, well, I'm debugging it, so I prevent it from failing. So let's actually execute it, and then you see that it'll still work. And that is because actually all that exists. Okay, got it. So yeah, this created this actually worked because there's no ambiguous thing. Okay, we're lucky. So if you look at what this actually generated, you will see that, okay, so if you go to the where is it? Try and use email. Okay, where username and email and password. So luckily there's only a username, so this is not ambiguous. It understands that it goes on user and not on user email. This is also not ambiguous, so this only exists in email, and password also only exists. But if you would have said something like delete date is null, then probably we would have a problem here if I were to get rid of that one, because it would tell us, whoops, nope, this will not work. And that's absolutely correct. So you never want to have, so what are the good news? The good news is there is no security concern when it comes to injection. But there are a couple of cases where you say, like, wait a second, how can I bind this securely that I have the right kind of parameters here and not just take anything the API sends me? So there are a couple of things you can do. So one is in the ops extrude, where you basically say, okay, I'm going to define something in an array, and that's the only thing I'm going to take out. So let's say I'm only going to take out the username and from the params, right? So this keeps the regular stuff in here. So I'm going to var dump that quickly so you see it in between. Okay, so see, this is the only thing left, and this is the result again. So we stripped it basically from email, password, and delete date, and we only took the username in. Now, depending on how many parameters you're dealing with, this could be quite annoying. So we could also like do this completely differently and say we're going to use the ask. So the ask is a quite complex function. Basically, the ask can do a lot of things, but what we wanted to do right now is we wanted to use a file. So if I started with the first parameter with a slash, it expects a file to be there. Or actually, you know what? Let's start with inline first. So I'm going to start with this and say select from user where username like username. Right? Don't worry about escaping or anything. So what will happen now? Is the debug still on? No, it's not. So, and we get the result. I mean, this is a binary now, so that's kind of ugly, but we don't care. So let's, instead of doing this, let's click on the debug. Oh, and sorry, this is also not necessary anymore. So here we can see the only exclusion it takes is neon. Why? Well, this is the only string it found, and it's still secure. As you can see, it transforms it to a prepared statement and then executes it at a later time. So that is also pretty aggravating if you're dealing with you know, like really deep things, and also like your editor might kind of be confused on what's happening here. So you can also start with a slash, and that would mean it's a file. So if it /user, then it expects it to be in component user, wherever that is. Yep, component user. I could also say, okay, user sum, and then it would expect it in user with the sum .sql rather than user.sql. But and I can go as deep as I want, but I mean, don't, you know, eventually gets aggravating. So right now I'm just calling this user SQL, and you can see like, okay, so I prepared this and I only have the username. This has exactly the same effect. So if I run this, I shouldn't actually see any kind of difference here. Right, this is exactly the same. So that's all fine and dandy. What else? So if and we've seen this here, if it has two parameters and the first parameter is a string, then it's going to be an insert. And this sounds kind of weird at the beginning, but think about it. So what table, and then what is basically your field set. So here you say like, okay, ID is set to this, username is set to this, password is set to this. That must be an insert. Why? I do not define where it should apply to. Okay, so if I want to do the same thing here and say, okay, so I want to modify user now, and I want to set username to foo, where username is param's username. Okay, so yeah, actually let's look at that result right now like this. It shouldn't really tell us anything other than, yep, are we still running the debug? We're still running the debug. Let's actually execute it, and that'll give us a little bit more detail here. Okay, so this is actually in an operation that probably from an API perspective doesn't make so much sense. So basically it says, okay, one row was affected. So what we actually want to have is basically, well, what is this, right? So let's see. So now we already changed it. Okay, wasn't very smart. So we're just going to say user everything and user ID as ID, and have this like that, where username, and actually I can just get rid of that one. That'll be fine. Okay, so now let's see what we updated. Okay, that doesn't exist anymore. I forgot. So that is now and there we go. So this is what we get from the user itself, and as you can see, everything works fine. There are a couple of other things that need to be considered, but basically it includes considerations of, well, you know, where to place functions, shouldn't that be in the model, and so on and so on, and that's all true. Just wanted to quickly show you, you know, how that works. So we have basically the easy to work, relatively straightforward. We have that's, you know, for simple, you know, queries that you normally just like, you know, get somehow. And actually there are a couple of more complicated things that you can also do. So let's say you want to insert like you know, 500 users or whatever. You can directly say like, well, I'm going to prepare a statement here, right? And say, okay, I don't know, insert into user, and then I don't know, let's say username values. Yeah, that should be enough. So this is, I don't know how often, I don't want to get, you know, too deep into that. I know that prepared statements are a little bit confusing for some people. Yeah, maybe that's right. Maybe we should go in there in a different scenario when we get a little bit you know, deeper into that. But in theory, let me just finish it. I don't want to let you hang here. I'm going to execute the statement, and basically put in the statement here that I want to execute. And let's say in that case it is S, and it is Freeman. Okay, so, and also I'm gonna do the query after all of that, and gonna simply get all my users in here now, and I'm also gonna do layman. All right, now let's see what happens. Bam. Oops. Wrong parameter count. Really? Okay, I made a mistake here. Apps exception not found. Okay. What? Okay, let me see if the first one failed as well. It did. They both failed. Okay, so what am I missing here? Oops. This must be an array, right? That's the point. Okay. Yep, I guess that'll solve it. Yep. Okay, so let's not do that anymore though. So that is basically the point. And now I have 2 users in there. Why do I only have 2 users though? I have to look into the prepared statements a little bit deeper. But anyway, this is how you execute. And I hope that was a nice introduction, and see you next time.